well, Orange versus Kolento is the first match that we got coming up, so we can start jumping into that one and take a look at what we have. So let's take a look at Kolento's deck and see what he's brought to the table. It's the good old mage deck, and with the mainstay of the Frostbolt that he has started the season with. It was his very first match that he played. He had 2 Magic Dart Frogs, 2 Arcane Missiles, and a Frostbolt in there. And while the others have seemed to rotate out, the Frostbolt has become a fairly reasonable linchpin, I think, of the early game where this deck can really struggle.
Yeah, I never really knew about those Dart Frogs. It was something that I was debating with a couple of other casters when we were watching the early weeks of Grandmasters. A lot of people were in favor of them, and I just didn't really see them having a high enough impact, so it's no surprise to me to see those melting away as the weeks have progressed forwards. But that Frostbolt, I think, is a beautiful thing. I think it's a fantastic card, and I think it makes even more sense when you've built this deck in the way that Kolento has, where neither of his additional decks are leaned towards Rogue. We talked about this yesterday, when Bunny Hopper was playing a single halftime scavenger in his core mage deck. So his primary deck was tilted ever so slightly towards Rogue. Kolento's doing kind of that same thing with Frostbolt. And it's just the way he's chosen to put things together with the 3 decks. They have to come together as a package, and that kind of makes sense.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that he doesn't have a strategy prepared for Rogue, because that is exactly what Orange has brought to the table. And if you look at Europe, it is 4 Cyclone Mages and 2 Rogue decks that are brought to the table. In Orange, I feel like the Rogues nailed it this week, where Mage is one of the matchups that slight matchup you're going to get an edge on at this point. And so I think that bringing Rogue in the spot where the other 4 players who are non-Rogues have brought Mage, that's the biggest edge you're going to get, I think, in deck building.
We're going to fight on this a little bit. It's going to keep coming up. I don't personally believe primary versus primary is hugely Rogue favored, if at all. But where I will absolutely agree with you is when the secondary deck comes in here and the Walk the Planks and the Betrayal and the Fairy Dragon come in. Not only do the mages not really tech back against that by having a secondary or tertiary deck for the Rogue, you have to ask the bigger question of how can they tech back against that, right? Like, their whole game plan is just to explode onto the board with big minions and dominate the game. If you're playing against a deck that can play tempo and then punish you with efficient removal afterwards, how do you adapt a mage deck to fight back against that?
You completely swap archetypes.
Ah, right, yeah, that makes sense. With just 5 cards.
Everybody knows about that other mage archetype that's really good.
Could you like transform it into freeze mage, maybe, like with just burn damage? That doesn't work, does it? No.
You need a lot of cards for that.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, game number 1 of this opening round match, of course. All of these opening round matches are kind of never before seen encounters as far as Grandmasters goes, because these are the cross-divisional matchups. Seed number 2 from their respective division crosses over into the other division's bracket, if you want to look at it that way. So Kolento is here as the invader, trying to take this win away from Orange.
I'm going to hit you with a thought here. If I saw this correctly, Orange kept Vendetta in his hand.
Did he now? Did he keep Blink Fox Vendetta, or did he just Vendetta?
I believe it was just Vendetta.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, I don't hate it. It's a very, very powerful card to when you don't have those key removals in your deck. There's kind of 2 ways to look at it, right? If you don't have the Walk the Plank, Sap, Betrayal stuff piled into your deck, you can keep the Vendetta because it's one of the most effective ways, if you can get it down to 0, to deal with giants when they come down. The other way to make that argument is to say, well, my deck isn't built to play that kind of game, so I'm just going to mulligan for max pressure, and then I'm going to kill them instead. So I don't know, I can kind of see it both ways.
I like it. The thing that I've noticed is a lot of players have not kept Vendetta.
Game plan! Sorry to interrupt you.
Damage plus damage plus damage.
Yeah.
Plus big damage. This is, I think, a really interesting spot here for Orange. Something that he's opened my eyes to with the Rogue versus Mage matchup is the idea that Mage can be gassed out. That's kind of an unusual thought, where if you think about it, most of the time that Warriors have tried to just simply gas out a Mage, what ends up happening is lots of things pile onto the board and they don't end up winning. I think the reason it doesn't really work for Warriors, you don't necessarily have a pressure plan. Your pressure plan, I would say, is inconsistent at best. But when it's at its best, it's pretty good. That's kind of how Bomb Warrior is in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But with Rogue, you have a lot of different angles of pressure. You have a massive amount of burst. And so I think when you can combine those two plans, you can get some pretty significant payoffs in the right spot. And so for Orange, having this Blink Fox Frost bolted, I think this is the start of a bad situation for him, where he still has a pretty good shot given his hand.
Yeah. This is a philosophy or a concept that I kind of picked up from Zalay, and it was one of the first like real epiphanies about Hearthstone that I had in a long time. You know, as you are learning the game early on, those epiphany moments, those eureka moments happen all the time, right? But later on, it becomes a lot more of a struggle to find those big breakthroughs. But Zalay was on stream one day talking about the value of going face, as he said it, where if you're a deck that applies pressure, that pressure causes your opponent to use their high value cards for less value because they're under pressure. I think that goes to explain why, in your case, Rogue can sometimes outvalue a mage in this matchup. Because they put pressure on, some of the value from the mage is taken away by them like having to scramble and like Conjurers calling their 3-drops or their 4-drops just to fight onto the board.
Yeah.
And just sometimes that's just a huge chunk of the value in their deck gone.
Indeed. It's a tough choice. I'm looking at Rebuke being able to solidify some pressure points. I was looking at Unleash the Hounds being able to perhaps make some work on a Mirror Image turn or a big Mana Cyclone Sorcerer's Apprentice turn.
And I was looking at Nourish Rampant to Pyroblast them in the face.
Yeah, just like every Rogue deck does.
Yeah. No, that was probably the most ridiculous prospect out of the three.
Well, 6 mana Nourish, yeah.
Observe and reflect.
Yeah. If it kind of hit his curve next turn, then yeah, maybe we could talk about it, but seems unlikely in that spot.
So this hand is, it's gotten a little clunky for Kolento. With 2 Sorcerer's Apprentice, I could see one of these being used. The Coin and Ziliax, I feel like, is the one play I definitely want to avoid in this situation. I feel like that Coin's important.
Why is that?
Number 1, I'm looking at a Mana Cyclone. Number 2, I'm looking at a hand that doesn't really do anything right now.
Right.
If you end up coining here and then you draw an Arcane Intellect, like, you're going to have a number of dead turns, it feels like.
Yeah. I think throwing away the coin, yeah, I think Arcane Intellect is a great thing to point out because then you don't have any flexibility on other 3 mana cards that you pick up off the AI afterward, but even, like, throwing away the coin, which is, you know, mild ramp, and also shrinking down your hand size by spending 2 cards, you're also then weakening Mountain Giant draws, like Archmage Antonidas. If that comes into your hand, that's looking weaker as well, which is kind of the big kicker that even Orange himself actually talked about, right? That if you do try and outvalue a mage, it often only works if they've taken the Antonidas out of their deck to tech against you. So yeah, lot of impact. Just simple decision of using a coin there, which it just looks like a very straightforward play, right? Coin Ziliax, kill the 4/3, but he doesn't have to. The coin's valuable. His hand size is valuable.
You also have to think about, you know, Orange's hand. He doesn't have a particularly large hand read right now. He's seen Blink Fox and he's seen Hedgeclan Burglar. Those are about the things that Orange wants to do every single game.
Right.
He has no idea if there's Backstab, if there's Edwin, if there's Spirit of the Shark turns, Evil Miscreant, like. Perhaps you're giving them a way to interact in the situation where Orange is going to take that time to say, I'm going to rebuke, I'm going to play a 4/4, I'm going to hit you in the face, and I'm going to hope that this is good enough to start this train of damage. And I think the Leroy draw might have been what prompted this.
It may be, yeah. It's interesting, though, to do it into a Ziliax turn. Like, I expect that rebuke in that situation is just kind of a, yikes, my hand kind of sucks, let's just do something, or this turn specifically, let's just do something kind of mana efficient and get a 4/4 onto the board, because how many high impact spells are you looking to beat on that turn?
Well, perhaps it also has to do with the fact that he didn't see Ziliax, that he didn't see Coin Ziliax.
Okay.
Thinking to himself, maybe he doesn't have Ziliax at all. And so that this rebuke becomes, you know, it becomes pretty massive if there's no Ziliax on Kolento's side.
Sure.
Like if Kolento, let's just say that he had Mountain Giant on that turn instead. Orange is then looking at a Vendetta and hit it with a Waggle Pick and smack Kolento for 8. With a Leroy in hand.
Yep. No, I completely agree.
Yeah.
That's why I say, like, using the rebuke there just to get a 4/4 Edwin on the board is totally reasonable. Like, even if it's not necessarily disrupting a huge spell, with the upside of sometimes disrupting a spell.
And look at the turn that the Mountain Giant shows up. This is prime.
Seems like a pretty good turn to me. I wasn't sure which way you're going with that. I was like, this looks like a pretty good turn for it to show up
well,
to me.
If Mountain Giant showed up last turn, and then somehow Kolento ends up landing on Mountain Giant, which I don't think he would have.
And reflect.
Sort of one of the keys I want to point out with this deck is you don't always plop a Giant. In game 1, sometimes you do. Games 2 and 3, it's very different.
Right.
So many times I see players play this deck, and they're very much on the side of they never play their Giant or they always play their Giant. I'm in a situation where I feel like it always depends on your hand and what you're facing down. There are no rules with the mage deck.
Kolento looked like he was leaning Sorcerer's Apprentice there for a second, which I'd be surprised not to see the Giant come down here. The problem with like Giant is kind of like the last remaining good thing in your hands right now. I can definitely see that point, and like you're kind of giving it up almost to the board state, at least one of them, but there's still a big demand to kill that second Giant or second Grave Horror that comes out, and if it doesn't, like your turns are pretty much set for the rest of the game at that point.
Well, I feel like that SI is a bit of a blessing of a draw, where Orange was looking at floating 3 mana alongside of this, and then suddenly you have an SI7 agent, now you have options for how you want to play this.
So you were thinking Vendetta Waggle Pick as like the default?
That was my default.
Yeah, and then SI just fills out the curve really nicely.
But
Makes
now I'm
sense.
looking at it and I'm thinking perhaps Vendetta Spear to the Shark SI7 agent.
Then you leave one up, don't you? Am I missing something?
I intend to leave one up here.
Really?
Well, I'm going to have a Spear to the Shark in play. I'm going to have a Waggle Pick and a
That's
Life
true.
Drinker
No,
with
okay.
Leroy.
All right. No, you've made me interested.
I can see it both ways. I think the Waggle Pick getting developed is important, but same thing for Spear to the Shark, though. You know, how long are you going to have to really activate combos and battle cries?
Right.
I think this is a really tough turn
You
for
see Orange's mouse movements just going through exactly the same process right now. That's kind of crazy. There's also the other option. You just do it this way and just like
hit him in the face.
Go face, ignore the second Giant. They don't always get taunts. Sometimes you have to take risk. Yeah, actually, I like, after much deliberation, I've actually come to the same place where the Orange did. I think this makes a lot of sense.
I think going face when you have Leroy's Life Drinker, Pyroblast, Spear to the Shark, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Orange is at 26, Kolento is at 14.
That damaged face is actually super important, and like, I said that, you know, there's a plan as soon as the Pyroblast appears, and then actually kind of forgot about it, because even if the defensive options do come out now from Kolento to lock this out, Orange only needs to get 4 more damage in, and then he's in Pyroblast range. So he only needs to go Spirit of the Shark Life Drinker, which, you know, bypasses taunts, bypasses Frost Nova, bypasses everything else. So actually, his game plan at this point just becomes live on turn 9. That's all he has to do.
Kolento finds a counterspell, though, and I think that the counterspell for Kolento is more in line with thinking of Shadow Step and with the single copy of Eviscerate, from Orange's deck right now. Wow.
That's such an insane turn from Kolento. You talk about covering all the bases that I just described earlier. Frost Nova comes down, so they're not challenging the Grave Horrors, which then, you know, set him up for quicker potential lethals. The counter spell is in play when the only spell that Orange has available is his win condition Pyroblast right now. Like, it just beat everything that turn.
Exactly. When your condition through this is live through turn 9, and then this happens, are you living through turn 9 anymore?
Right.
So then, look at that play. I mean, maybe you are supposed to kill both Giants. You know that there's a Conjurer's Calling there.
I still think this is fine. I think, like, look at how ridiculous the turn that came back was, right? 2 Sorcerer's Apprentices, plus a Frost Nova that was randomly generated, plus the 1 secret that shuts down your game plan. I think that's pretty reasonable.
I wasn't even thinking about the secret. I was just thinking about dying on turn 9.
Yeah, sure.
That's where my concern, I feel like, rests with this.
I mean, if he doesn't get Frost Nova'd here, he's in a decent play. Like, so much pressure came down alongside this, right? Like, Khadgar Conjurer's Calling was the one way that more pressure came down.
Yeah.
So, like, close to the max pressure came down, but even then, if his board didn't get frozen, he would have outs to remove some of this from the board. So I still think that you're in a position where, like, you made a good play and your opponent just had the max punish for what you tried to do.
You'd be playing around too much stuff otherwise.
That's kind
Doomsayer,
of weirdly helpful.
So Doomsayer, a lot of times when you see that off of Faceless Lackey, it just ends up being a pure liability for the player who got it.
Not here, though.
Yeah, here, though, it feels more like a heal for 7 card.
Right.
Kolento needs to kill that.
Observe and
that 0-mana Sea Giant going to end up being the kicker, though. Power of Creation as well. Kolento could just load up so much damage this turn. I'm not sure how Orange is going to find a way to live through this. the Arcane Explosion.
More taunts.
Also just the most damage. I didn't see the third one. Lord of the Arena, Can, and what else was it?
Frost Elemental.
Okay, so yeah, it is. It's just the most damage as well.
It's going to ship 14 face, and I don't think Orange can live through that. And why not?
If this shark bites the dust, that's probably the final nail in the coffin. Even if this was like randomly generated something, now he just doesn't have the way to get the damage through to set up the Pyroblast. Yep. Definitely a good turn to go back and debate the turn where Orange decided to ship face. I kind of went through the roller coaster where very early in the turn I wanted to trade, but the more I talked about it, I think shipping face and setting yourself up with an out was correct. I'm not 100% convinced on that. I could be convinced otherwise. But I think we're in a spot there where Orange just made a pretty smart play, or like a logical play, a consistent play, and he just was met with a horrible punish.
And for me, the patience of Kolento to just hang on to everything until the key turn. That's so hard to do, I feel like, with Mage, especially like when you, after I've done watching someone like Fino play, where it seems like cards just sling onto the board with reckless heed for consequence. And then you watch Kolento, just patience, 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 and his Ziliax is able to stabilize him to this big endgame point. Something that I look at with Mage there from Orange's perspective is it's tough for him to make a play from his spot that I feel like he's 100% confident in, because how does he identify Kolento's hand range in that spot? Like if his range can include 2 copies of Sorcerer's Apprentice with a Conjurer's Calling and a Frost Nova and a Mana Cyclone in that spot,
right?
It's just like, well, I mean, these cards could have been anything. It could have just easily been a bunch of Giants and nothings on the back end of that. It could have been 2 Evocations. It could have been, you know, pretty much anything other than Arcane Intellect and Ray of Frost in those spots.
Yeah, Arcane Intellect was kind of the one thing you ruled out, like maybe a Banana Buffoon as well, but it's the weird kind of calm before the storm moment. Like you feel that ominous energy when Kolento just has turn 4, ping your guy pass, right? Like when you're playing against Mage, that is a terrible, terrible feeling. But better feeling for Orange now, because he does have some answers for those kind of positions with this secondary deck that he's bringing in for Rogue. Walk the Plank comes in, Fairy Dragon comes in, Betrayal comes in. This is what I would call the go-to, the standard secondary deck for facing down Mage. We've covered it a lot, but if you're just seeing it for the first time, this is something that I wasn't initially too sold on. I wanted to put more and more aggression in there. Fairy Dragons, Hench Clan Thugs, you know, all these kind of things, just beat them up real quick. But I think over time, it really became clear to me that just your removal got so much better when you had that early pressure that you can really afford to carry 1 or 2 potential dead cards in your deck.
I definitely agree with that. You know, I think that this deck, the reason it has the edge is because you're looking to punish the inconsistencies from the Mage deck. You're not looking to beat them when they have giant Khadgar Conjurers calling very early on after they've drawn 1 million cards. Decks don't really beat that against Mage. Like, that's why Mage is such a powerful deck. It gets those draws sometimes, and they're going to win games. You're trying to beat the draws where your opponent has a Frostbolt, where your opponent just has the Ziliax and tries to scale to the endgame. You want to have enough damage that it makes a difference. Look at game 1 if Kolento doesn't have that Frostbolt instead. That Blink Fox hammers face for about 12 points of damage.
Yep, it gets 2 more turns in at the very least, and then Orange has a much easier time setting up that win condition.
Indeed. So for Kolento, he's on the primary, sticking with 30. He did not bring a game plan for Rogue, saying that he, last week in his interview, that it wasn't enough. He rather than just give himself in a position where he's like, well, pick 2 out of the 3 decks and try to play against them. Nope, I think I'm strong enough versus Rogue to pick up some wins. I want to have strong game plans for the mirror match and strong game plans for Warrior.
He made the point that a lot of the time when the Mage is seen teching for Rogue, they're bringing in 2 cards. And to him, what that told him was that the matchup is probably just fine. If all they needed to change was 2 cards to really optimize it. So he chose to take the strategy of just saying, you know what, my deck has a Frostbolt in it anyway, which makes it slightly better than some of the other primary Mage lists we've been seeing in Grandmasters. I'm just going to run with this.
Interesting opening hand for Kolento here as well. Very strong. He's already got some early counterplay.
This is a Swiss Army knife of a hand right there. That will do just about everything you want it to. It even has that weird bit on it that no one knows quite what it's for. You know, that weird one?
But it seems like a toothpick, but it's not.
I'm not putting that thing in my mouth. That seems terrifying.
Well, I'm not putting anything from that's not like food in my mouth.
All right. Basically, what I'm trying to say is this hand could open a can of beans, no problem.
This book looks delicious. I was just about to ask you about this. The Sorcerer's Apprentice of the Mana Cyclone. Because you want to have something to counter-pressure a Fairy Dragon. You want to prompt your opponent to have to use a backstab or what have you.
Yes.
Neither of those are available for Orange right now, and so this turn is absolutely dreadful if you're in Orange's spot.
I like this way of doing it as well. It makes a lot of sense to me. Like you said, Orange will be tempted to use a backstab here to protect his Fairy Dragon. And I think I've talked about at length, like if you, as the Mage player, get a Mana Cyclone backstabbed in this matchup, like you take that as a win for yourself, right? Unless there is a 16-16 Edwin that comes down supporting the turn for the Rogue player, you're feeling like you're in a pretty good spot when that happens because you have so many valuable targets like Sorcerer's Apprentice and Khadgar that you can hide behind mirror images that then demand that backstab. So I think this is a good play from Kolento. It challenges the Fairy Dragon. It can essentially siphon a backstab out from Orange's hand when he does have Sorcerers in his own hand. And it just fits his curve nicely because if he can take care of this Fairy Dragon, free turn next turn to just play Arcane Intellect with no pressure on the board, that's a fantastic spot for him to be in.
Orange on Evil Miscreant due to the Shadow Steps that are in hand, wants to start getting some Lackey pressure going, and that gives Kolento time.
There it is. Rip the AI. This is what he sets up. He gets the payout for it.
Not the best draws, though.
No.
So now Kolento's hand is looking like it has a weakness to me right now. Failing to draw something that gets some headway done on board.
That's fair. He does have that Luna's in hand, and it doesn't look like from Orange's side that there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure hitting the board in the near future unless we see a lot of faceless lackeys coming out from these miscreants.
Have a second Shadow Step available as well.
Yeah, which means Kolento might have the time to just rip the Luna's Pocket Galaxy, in which case having all of his minions still in his deck can actually end up being an upside for him in a lot of spots, especially when he already has 2 Frost Novas. So at that point, any minion he draws just kind of becomes nutty. Yeah.
Something to really consider here, too, is how impactful 2-1 versus 1-1, or 2-1 versus 2-2 off the Faceless Lackey is, or just any 2-health minion, for that matter. There happens to be a copy of Shooting Star in Kolento's hand, but additionally to that, we've talked a lot about mages and how they tend to not want to use hero power. Like, if you're using hero power, it means you're having a pretty substandard turn.
Right.
But for Kolento right now, if this is the amount of pressure that Orange is applying, I think hero power starts to look a lot better in situations like this. Keep Orange from chipping away.
Someday I'll be just like you.
Taking his Sorcerer's Apprentice turn right now.
Tells me he very much intends to use Shooting Star. And your opponent Shadow Stepped an Evil Miscreant. Not exactly happy about that.
There must be a way.
Kolento's talked a lot about eliminating minions from the opposing side. You do it when you feel like when they're gone, you just can't lose.
Yeah, I do enjoy that interview. It's just very Kolento.
Well, it feels like he sniffed this one out. He's like, Waggle Pit could look bad for me. Another Shadow Step could look bad for me. I'll just take these minions out.
Yeah, and I think on the surface, he just wants to release as much pressure because I think his hand right now just relies on playing this Luna's Pocket Galaxy and having to high roll from that point. I would have been curious to see what had happened if a card draw option had come up off the magic trick instead of just straight up removal options, because that actually potentially could have been a dilemma in that point, like a real decision point. Do I take removal and free up the board state so I have more space to play Luna's Pocket Galaxy? Or do I take card draw so that I'm then in a better position to really pick up some explosive minions afterwards?
Yeah, to me, this is really cool because it shows how aggressively players are playing for big setup turns. Like when you have to sink a bunch of mana into setting something up and not making impact, it means you need to play aggressively on the turn prior. And that leaves Orange with Waggle Pick, attack, and go ahead. And this is going to be a terrible sight for Orange to see.
Ding! Yeah, and there's the reaction. Orange knows that, Orange knows that what he did can end up being a weak turn. It's just there's very little he was able to do about it.
Well, that is a lot of damage that just entered hand.
All right, bear with me. Do you play the Leroy? No, I'm kidding.
Well, I'm not kidding. I'm looking at Leroy, Waggle Pick Face. That's 10.
Okay.
Next turn, you have Leroy, Face. That's 16. You Shadow Step to Leroy. So that 3 more mana right there is going to represent your 22nd point of damage, and you have Eviscerate, Life Drinker, and Goblin Lackey left in hand.
29, 30. Okay.
Perhaps you do Leroy the Face.
All
this turn.
right, okay. So let's look at it more seriously. How much do you have to spend to get all of that done? You spend 5 this turn. Don't you have to? I think you have to play the Goblin Lackey this turn as well,
You
right?
cannot, because you have a Waggle Pick in play.
Oh, good point.
And Orange...
You spend 5 this turn, and you spend 6 next turn.
There's...
Okay, you can use the Goblin Lackey on the next turn because you're using a manual Shadow Step to get it done. So that
right.
helps out the mana efficiency.
You could also use the Shadow Step and perhaps develop a Life Drinker with it. I think in Orange's case, Mirror Image is going to come to his head, and he's going to weigh the consequences and benefits of that.
Yeah.
And so for Kolento, you see a turn like that, and you have Banana Buffoon. It's time to Conjurer's Calling this Banana Buffoon and get busy. Orange just told you exactly what his hand is doing.
Agreed. It's race time.
No taunts.
No taunts, no lifesteal. Largest minion pool in the game at the 3 mana slot, which makes it pretty high variance just in terms of, type of minion, specific minions that you're looking for, but it's a relatively flat pool in terms of stat outcomes.
I think Orange is counting up the potential counterattack damage that can happen.
Yep. Of course, every Leroy that he plays is just passing free damage over to his opponent.
But I think he's got this one.
That Spirit of the Shark Life Drinker interaction now becomes interesting as well because it gives him ways to ration out this damage that could potentially play around mirror images and so forth.
Yeah, I want to connect 2 more Leroys here. That's what I want to do.
I can agree with that. 13 more.
And then with 7 in hand. That's perfect.
Yep, I like it.
Wow. That Leroy draw may have been the saving grace.
I love that I brought it up just offhand as a way to kind of troll Orange, and it just ends up being the line. That's so cool to me.
Well, that's the thing is that last time you made that comment, I mean, Orange was in this situation where he played around a Life Drinker and ended up losing to a tough random outcome as a result. This is old Miracle Rogue 101, is how many times can I Leroy you before you Leroy me?
Right.
That's 3 now. And Kolento does not have a way to do anything to stop what Orange is going to do. There is no outcome at the 3-drop slot, I believe, that would change this.
Lifesteal Rush at 3? No, that's nonsense, right?
The only thing I'm thinking right now is you have so many minions in play. Is there a weird combination of double Raid Leader from Conjurer's Calling that makes a difference right now? That's the only random outcome he has, and Orange has 7 damage from hand.
Is there a 3 mana heal Death Rattle that you could Conjurer's Calling to get it and then Conjurer's Calling again to kill it? No?
If you could think of what that card would even be named.
I'm trying real hard, Nathan.
I'm thinking Raid Leaders.
Okay.
Plural S.
Hello? Far left? Ooh, it's a Wolf Rider. Okay. It's 10, 11, 12. Snip Snap is 14.
Snip Snap does not attach. Oh, it attaches to...
Clockwork.
Yeah. We go again. Nope.
Nope.
And what looked like it was going to end abysmally for Orange after he saw that Luna's Pocket Galaxy, a Leroy shows up. Game 3.
Very, very nicely done from Orange. Finds himself in a very, very difficult position. I was just talking about it when he loads up that Waggle Pick and he passes the turn with no pressure in play and the Luna's Pocket Galaxy comes down. You saw the look on his face and you heard me describe it as well. He knows that had the potential to be a bad turn for him, but there was nothing he could do about it. But then he got kind of rewarded for that play afterwards. He put himself on that out, just saying, hey, if I pick up a Leroy here, I have a plan if I just get this Waggle Pick down now and start chugging.
And again, this kind of plays into that situation where imagine if the Fairy Dragon goes unchecked. You have to check the early minions from Rogue. And I'm going to keep stressing this because that's the importance of taking weaker looking turns with Mana Cyclone, using a Frostbolt just on a 3/3. If those things are not done, Kolento dies very quickly. Like,
Yeah,
he checked everything that game and still died from
right,
30 health.
I was going to say, it's kind of funny in that position because it didn't really matter whether he killed the Fairy Dragon or not because he just died from 30 to Leroy combos anyway. But yeah, of course, it's a much more simple equation if the Fairy Dragon gets to put in 6, 9, 12 damage right off the bat.
Yeah, and so that's really the objective there. It's the consistent pressure from Rogue versus the responses from Mage. Mage has to have bigger turns.
Yeah.
They have to be able to check things, but they mostly have to have bigger turns. And so we're going to be on the same decks for game number 3 here, where, again, that's Orange's game plan, and Kolento does not have a side deck prepared for it. And this time, Orange is on coin, and I'm seeing a Walk the Plank, and I'm seeing a Blink Fox, and I'm seeing an Edwin. And for Kolento, the deck operates very differently without coin on Kolento's side. Aggression tends to be something that you need to think about getting going with this deck.
Orange throwing away the removal options, just sticking with pressure of his own. We've discussed many times, like the pressure is key. The pressure is the key that unlocks everything for the deck. If you have pressure, just about every draw at that point becomes live. If you draw removal, then you can use that removal to keep, pushing forward further minion damage. Whereas if you don't have pressure by having the early minions, then you just have the potential for a lot more dead draws. Your hand can start to fill up with pretty airy draws off the top that just don't impact the board state.
Mirror Image kept in hand. No comment?
I mean, I don't hate it. He's definitely got things to think about with Fairy Dragon implications and so on. It's one of those things where with the old mulligan system where you could kind of wait and see how your opponent mulligans, like you might have more impact on that. It's like if he full keeps, he's got a Fairy Dragon.
Ah, right, the old mandatory rope mode.
Yeah, exactly. We hated that. That was a very good change. But like it's definitely a very impactful card in the matchup. We saw in that previous game how Mirror Image kind of would have solved the equation for Kolento if he'd had it on the right turn. It's extremely good for blocking out Waggle pick targets. It's decent if you pick up early minions to be able to contest Fairy Dragon, which is exactly what we saw him do in game 1, Mana Cyclone Mirror Image.
Good with Sea Giant, good with Khadgar. Look at this Book of Specters that Kolento took too. He thought exactly about mana expenditure over the next 2 turns. He had an option for Arcane Intellect. And looking at his hand, he went, you know what? I just need minions.
Yeah, I'm going 2 into 3. Makes sense.
That's so strange to me. It makes me want to just play Book of Specters in the deck. When I see something like that, I'm like, it really isn't that bad. Yeah. Then you play it in the deck and you realize, oh no, it's that bad.
Yeah, it's suboptimal in this deck. I don't necessarily think it's like a dumpster card or anything. I think those style of cards are like one of the hardest to really wrap your head around the functionality. You know, like tracking, Book of Specters, Fel Reaver, for example. Like these are all cards that like certain people look at and go, well, this is horrible. All my cards are burning, and there's this animation that makes me upset. I don't like it very much. But I think generally, like, burning and discarding cards is a quite misunderstood mechanic by a lot of the Hearthstone community.
Let's put it this way. When you hear a Mountain Giant hit you and it makes that large crashing sound, that's bad. When your card burns away, it just goes, it's not that bad.
I don't like that noise you just made. I don't want that noise to be made anymore.
Would you rather the Mountain Giant makes the crashing noise into your head?
What? I mean, if it was just... If
those are your options.
If the things had to happen, then yeah, I'd rather burn a card. But if I just had to listen to the noise, I'd rather listen to the Mountain Giant noise.
Well, I'm hoping I'm the one with the Mountain Giant, so...
Okay, sure.
Unless I'm against Sinto, lol. Hey.
Yikes.
But, we boiled down now to a game 3 where Kolento's having to play for tempo. I think he's got the right tools to do that with the Khadgar Mirror Image and having found Sea Giant. And so I think that this is a game where Walk the Plank could really shine. And this is a pretty important match. I mean, this is to get that second life and have 2 chances to make it out of the group.
I believe Kolento can get Sea Giant into play this turn if he would like to.
Discount the mana by 5 costs with Khadgar, making it down to 6, and then Mirror Image making it down to 2.
Yep. And then he trades the Snip Snap, which takes it down to 1. He's spent 3.
4, 5, 6. Then you have 7 minions in play.
Yes, you do. All right, good point.
So it sounds like he has to wait 1 more turn. Does that mean kill a Blink Fox? Or does that mean Arcane Intellect?
Oh, do I ever hate pinging with this deck.
Does it mean
Observe
Khadgar Mirror
and
Image?
reflect.
And then just play the Sea Giant for a more fair cost on the following turn. The Mirror Images start to absorb a lot of damage.
That's a good point. So you can't go Mirror Image now, and we've brought the Giant down to...
Wait a minute. Khadgar trade Snip Snap.
Observe and reflect.
If you Khadgar and trade Snip Snap, you make 4 tokens.
Oh. You're right, I completely forgot about that. The change of the Master Tide, so that already takes it down to 3, right? Yes. Okay, this makes sense.
Oh, that's way good.
Yeah, I like this.
There's 2 reasons why it's way good. The first one is Orange really wants to kill Khadgar. Number 2, you have a lot of things in play.
Sorry, I'm just very amused by the sentence. There's 2 reasons why it's way good.
So many options.
I just forgot.
The only downside I see with this line of play is that you do open up the potential that those Sea Giants can get somewhat stranded in your hand, but it's kind of unlikely, right? If Orange starts to pick apart this board state. It's not a board state that he's going to be really interested in trading into. Like the Khadgar goes down, that's what you're expecting to happen, so then your Giant costs 5, which is perfectly reasonable for you, even if it's a Waggle Pick turn. Is that Waggle Pick killing a 1-1 to play around a Sea Giant?
I guess the way that I look at it is if you keep your minions in play, good. If you don't keep your minions in play, it means that Orange is spending his stuff on killing your 1-1.
Killing your 1-1.
That sounds good.
Agreed.
It would mean he's not adding pressure to the board. And this turn, Orange finds use out of the Elemental Invocation in hand, which is useless in his deck. Randomly generated, of course. And of the Shadow Step. Make the Leroy bigger. I'm sorry, make the Edwin bigger.
This turn, Kolento does have all the options. Mirror Image, taking the first Giant down to 2. He can play it, then trade off space, and still have enough to play the second Sea Giant as well.
Yep, and then kill off the Blink Fox. And in Orange's spot, you can take care of 1 Giant, but 2 Giants is a problem.
Very nice Betrayal positioning as well. This is sometimes the problem, even when you have all the removal locked and loaded as Rogue, Mage can just go off so early that you just don't have the resources to spend.
I don't blame anyone for not playing around double Sea Giant, but could that have been accounted for?
I mean, we talked about it a lot,
You're just playing
right?
around too much stuff at that point, right?
Yeah, like, what are you doing? Is your turn Waggle Pick hit a 1-1 with your Waggle Pick to play around Sea Giant like that?
That's awful.
I'm not having a good time with that turn.
That's a bad time.
Or, like, trade into something, Shadow Step one of your minions off the board and keep it in your hand? Like, no, that sounds terrible as well.
It sounds like if I'm going to play around it, I'm just going to ruin my plays and just have a bad turn.
Yeah.
Sounds like the best counterplay to me is set up a mirror image.
Interesting. He's choosing to use the cheaper of the 2 options. The easier of the 2 to weave in alongside something else.
Spends 5 mana versus spending 4. And also,
that is true.
It offers you the surprise factor where, you know, the natural turn for Kolento is, oh, I have 6 mana and there's a Sea Giant.
Right.
Giant.
Sure.
Someday I'll be
Instead,
just like
it's play Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Someday I'll be just like you.
So you are right in that, like, technically that turn is more mana efficient. It's just in future turns, you're going to get into a world where you want to kill another minion, and you now have to spend more to kill another minion because you have a war. So, like, does the mana efficiency really work out? I'm not sure.
To me, it's hard to look at this because I'm just looking at the Conjurer's Calling in Kolento's hand. You know, that's the one thing that players often account for when they see a Giant in play. And a lot of times your hand just can't account for it. Like, a Conjurer's Calling will often seal the deal if that's the case. And that's what this Conjurer's Calling has done. Orange is pushed out of the game unless he can find a way to deliver lethal pressure and fend off the damage. And that's not happening. He needed Betrayal this turn.
You can see it on his face, just desperately trying to find some kind of win condition now. Waggle Pick Leroy combination is there yet again. But he just has so little to work with. That break the pick Leroy, replay Leroy combo doesn't finish until turn 8.
I don't think that given the cards, Orange had the way to account for this. I think Kolento just timed his pressure really well, spotted a good play with the Khadgar, built board tension at the right times, and had the hand to capitalize.
Yeah. Yeah, the 1-2 punch of setting up the Sea Giants where he just kind of went halfway in on the first turn and then knew that he'd have some kind of residuals left over for the Sea Giant afterwards. And he obviously spotted the best way of doing it by remembering that Khadgar works with Death Rattle summoning. But still, it was a great recognition of the spot to be in.
So I admire Orange here. His efforts are futile. Sometimes you just get got.
Yeah. There's just an Auctioneer in play. I mean, there's Auctioneer Sorcerer's Apprentice in play. It doesn't matter, but it is amusing nonetheless. I'm here for this.
Yeah, that's almost as good as a Stargazer Luna.
I mean, when I get it, if you were to give me either one for free, then yeah, I think we can talk about it.
That sound.
That sound. That's the sound that tells you you've done a good thing.
Orange falls to Kolento 2 games to 1, and so Kolento now moving on to face Hunter Ace, where Kolento has 2 tries to make it out of the group. If he can defeat Hunter Ace, he makes it out. If he cannot, he will move down to face Orange again, where he'll have one more opportunity to defeat him and move out of the group. So for Orange, he has to win the next match or he's out. And for Kolento now, 2 tries on deck.
Yep, and all he has to do is just do what he just did there, even if he loses to Hunter Ace, so he'll be feeling pretty good about it. That matchup really does interest me a lot. There's, you know, a reason why I've kind of made it a point just to be slightly contrary whenever you've set it up as rogue favored in the matchup. It's one of those things where I play a ton of mage, so sometimes, you know, you are naturally inherently biased towards the decks that you play more of. But it's a matchup that I enjoy playing from the mage side. I think there's a lot of positions where you can really leverage options. Obviously, I'm not particularly used to playing against 2 Walk the Planks and Betrayals, but if you can get your job done by turn 5, like Kolento did that game, then that stuff very rarely matters.
And that so much of that was off the back of Kolento's mulligans in that situation, where he keeps Mirror Image as a disruption effect.
Huge payoff for that with the Sea Giants.
And keeps Snip Snap in the opening hand as well in that spot. You know, I know so many times I've played Mage and I've looked at my hand and gone, I need something big to happen. And so that's where my head goes. What are the big cards that make big things happen? I don't really think of Snip Snap and Mirror Image being those cards, but got the job done in that one.
They sure did. I've definitely had some Mirror Image keeps in my time. I think it's a pretty useful card in a lot of spots, but it's very context dependent. It needs support from other cards, and seeing Kolento keep it there really without like the support network around it and then just drawing the payoff, that was really cool.
Here's my Giants Conjurers Calling deck. Let me hang on to this Mirror Image Snip Snap.
It's a good card.
Let's take a look at the bracket and see how it's shaping up. I described it a bit, but you can get a visual here of where it is. Orange now on the last life. If he's going to make it through the global finals this year. You know, it's been 7 weeks of Grandmasters play and 14 matches to earn the playoff spot. And you're down to that one last try. For now, though, Hunter Ace versus Kolento is the matchup that we've got our eyes on because that's where we're headed next.
And if Kolento defeats Hunter Ace and it's Hunter Ace that then goes down to that decider, that is going to be a very emotional matchup because Orange and Hunter Ace is a better love story than Twilight. They are 2 of the best friends that you will ever find in Hearthstone. And those 2 having to go up against each other with everything on the line in that decider match, that'll be huge.
They've practiced together for so many matches, for so many tournaments, and it's
so many pictures of ice cream being eaten like on Casper's side.
You also have to consider the matchup record between the 2 of them, where Orange Lifetime has a favorable match record in tournaments versus Hunter Ace.
Is that true? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think he's at 4-2 now.
Wow.
Versus Hunter Ace, it might be 4-1. He would split the season with him this Grandmaster split.
Yeah.
Where early on, Orange had the story of he was only able to defeat former and current world champions and lose to everybody else. where he quickly turned that around for his sake, thankfully.
It lasted like 2 weeks, and you're still
4
hammering it home.
matches.
Okay, all right. Fine.
4 matches. I'm just
Fine.
saying.
Have your moment.
We gotta go to a quick break so the players can have a moment as well. Kolento's gonna be back on playing against Hunter Ace coming up. So a couple more matches before we're done with European playoffs for today, but we still got plenty more that's coming up. Also, we mix up the casters, so stay tuned. We got plenty more surprises here on Hearthstone Grandmasters.